It is my esteemed pleasure once again, and always is my pleasure, to bring before you the great, eminent African history historian, Dr. John Henrik Clarke.
Thank you very much. My subject is the impact of the African mind on world history. We often forget that we began the beginning. We started everything. Before us, there were no books. Before us, there was no government. Before us, there was no humanity, no social thought, no spirituality that later became part of the world's religion. In County Cullen's poem, Heritage, he begins with a question: what is Africa to me? What I'm trying to do tonight is to extend the question, not only by repeating the question, what is Africa to me, but by saying, what is Africa to Africans, and what is Africa to the world? Many people have lost their nationhood. Many people have been conquered. Many people have been abused. And yet, our loss was singularly the greatest loss of any people in human history. Our loss was so great that it was difficult for us to recover, because we lost self-confidence and we lost the image of the world as we had previously conceived the world. And our loss was so devastating when it was over, or almost over. We could not address God in a language of our own choosing, or imagine God as any person that looked like us. And we began to accept the image of God resembling our slave master. This image has damaged our mind, because no matter what that image has done to you, you are reluctant to challenge the image for fear you're harming the image of God. You will kill each other for stepping on your freshly shined shoes, but you won't kill anything that looks like that image. You can steal a black man's country and get away with it. Steal his lady, he'll kill you. But only if you're black. People have been permitted through oppression to turn on you the one thing that you should use to maneuver yourself through the world. The image of yourself as brought into the world by faith, God in your mother and father. If you say you don't like that image, that means you are denying what your mother and father, what faith in God, no matter what you call him, did for you. You're also forgetting that good is a relative term, and what is good for one people may not be for another people. And when people out of power come to power and rearranges power, good becomes what the new powerful people approves of, and bad becomes what the new powerful people intends to oppress. We forgot that we rule the state. One of the things which hampers even entrepreneurship in our own community is that entrepreneurship is part and parcel of the state. And we have forgotten state formation and state management. And if you forget how to rule a state, you will forget how to rule a candy store. And one thing relates to the other, because if the mind can conceive of one, it can conceive of the other. Many people coming to this country, though defeated and oppressed in their own land, comes from a country where they saw their people managing stores, where they saw their people as petty judges, schoolmasters, running things as the basic heads of things. The most devastating blow of oppression that struck our mind was oppression in the United States. And the African has not thoroughly understood the nature of oppression in the United States, nor have the Caribbean people understood the nature of oppression, nor have they understood their own world responsibility in African reconstruction in giving to the world a new image of the African people in head of a state. Because when they came to power, being a majority, neither in the Caribbean islands nor in Africa did one truly African state with African values emerge. Every single state, no exception, is an imitation European state. They too forgot the time in our history when we ruled the state by values we developed, by spirituality we developed, by a code of honor we developed. And when we ruled the state in that manner, we produced enduring societies that lasted thousands of years without a jail system, because no one had ever gone to jail, so you needed no system. You did not have a word in your language that meant jail. Now, what prevailed and to what extent did the African mind exercise itself at this period in history to produce an atmosphere peaceful enough not to need a jail system, not to need a place of confinement. There are a lot of things I can tell you to read, but I know I am wasting my time because a lot of people listen to what you say they should read. They are intrigued by it, but they never stir themselves to read it. In a back issue of the Journal of African Civilization, I think it is the issue dealing with Nile Valley civilization or the issue dealing with great African thinkers, Sheikh Anta Diop has written one of the most concise essays of our time. I don't know who read it because I have not met a single person who's willing to discuss it with me. It's called African Contribution to Civilization, the Exact Sciences. Last year, only a few months ago, his main protege, Theophile Obenga, delivered a lecture from his major new book, The Pharaonic Origins of Greek Philosophy. In this lecture, he pointed out not only that Africa is the origin of Greek philosophy, but that the word philosophy is not even Greek or European. They not only did not create philosophy, they didn't even create the word. And when people look back and look at the stolen property of Africa that these icebox people are selling to the world as their property, you would understand a lot of things, including the book, that need to be reread, The Iceman Inheritance. Now, this is not the greatest book from a point of view of literature or organization, but its revelation and its confession, its omissions, breaks new grounds, because it is rare that a person on that side of the line makes these admissions, literally saying that Europeans came into the world with a parasitic idea and they maintained themselves in the world by preying on other people and creating a smoke screen to give you the illusion that they are right. Now, if you understood what I'm trying to say, you would understand why peace is deliberately delayed in that little drama in the sand where there can be no clear winner, because the war was stupid from both sides. And had we stayed out of it and given them a chance to settle it and stop going into it with a lie but it's about oil, when it's not about oil at all, because oil can be maintained, oil can be obtained from many places in the world other than Arabia, other than that part of the world. So what is it really about? It's about Western dominance over the resources of the world, Western military might, political might, financial might, putting everybody in the world in their place place is to be at the service of Western man, basically white men. What you are witnessing, and this might be too much of a digression, is a revolt in the servants' quarters. In the 15th and the 16th century, the Europeans identified certain portions of the world as their homes or their outposts. All the rest of the world became their servants' quarters. There is now a revolt in the servants' quarters. And they're trying to put down that revolt. But the servant now in revolt is schizophrenic, because the servant thought he and his money made him one of them, an honorary oppressor. They're trying to slap him down and let him know that a servant is a servant, and you don't hang out in the living room. And your money don't make you my equal. But the servant got enough nerve to threaten one of their servants, created to serve them, created as a holding station and as a watching post for them. A white nation in an eastern sea. So now the war is more about Israel than it is about oil. But we won't see this because we assume, because we buy mythology quicker than we buy truth, we think it's about somebody's homeland. The people who permitted the nation to be established could care less than a damn whether Jews have a homeland or not. The people who permitted the nation to come into being turned their backs and let millions of them go to the gas chamber. So there's no great love for them on the part of the people who put them down in this eastern sea to protect white interests. And because there are people who legitimately never had a homeland but longed for one out of their mythology, they gave them one and made them pay a high price for it. It is the homeland inside of their mind. But in actuality, the one they had in the Bible, even if it was legitimate, and I said was not, that one did not belong to those Europeans who were belatedly converted to the faith and who have no direct relationship to the biblical Jews, whoever the biblical Jews happen to be. Now let's go back and examine this African mind in the beginning of time, because this African mind existed for so many years before there was a Europe, before the civilizations of the Tigris and the Euphrates existed. This African mind had brought into being the spirituality that would later be the basis of all of the world's major religions. He had also brought into being the writing, the book, the coming forth by night and day, that would later become the basis of the world's philosophy and the basis of a great book of folklore called the Bible. Now when I say the Bible is a book of folklore, I'm not downgrading it, I am properly identifying it. Jewish folklore illustrating moral lessons. The lessons are good lessons. Lessons of truth. Lessons of morality. And I have said before, many times you tell a story to illustrate the truth. If the truth of the story gets across, the illustration need not necessarily be the truth. If you get the point. All right, now I'm going to tell you the old story I've told you 10 times before. Because it is simplicity. Animal called a spider, eating everything in sight. Greedy as he could be. He heard that there was going to be a banquet. 2 banquets, close together. He wanted to go to both of them. So he went near the banquets. He tied a string around his waist. He told one friend, when the banquet start over there, you pull, now come over here and eat. Start over here, you pull, now come over there and eat. Now you guessed it, what happened. Both banquets started at the same time. Both friends obeyed the order and pulled and pulled and pulled until they shrunk his waistline. Now, African mothers to this day tell this story to young people to tell them eat enough but not too much. Now, if the young people get across the truth of what the mother is saying, isn't important whether the illustration is the truth. The illustration was made up, but the lesson from the illustration is true. You shouldn't eat so much. My main point is that in an age where very few people wrote or read books, do not think there was no wisdom in the world. Because men told stories of wisdom. Finally, some people wrote those stories down. And this became the books in the book of the coming forth by day and night, mistakenly called the Book of the Dead. It was called the Book of the Dead because when the British were robbing graves throughout Egypt, some Arabs stumbled on a grave and found a great manuscript. And the British wanted to buy it. They said, where did you get it from? He pointed to one of the tombs where you stole it. He said, from those dead people over there. And the British called it the Book of the Dead. The Africans called it the Book of the Coming Forth by Day and Night. This would be one of the most influential books in the history of the world. Because with the Hebrew migration in Africa, into Africa, they would read this book and other books and copy from them the basis not only of their religion, but the basis of so much of their literature. I am not trying to delegitimize anything. I'm trying to explain the nature of its creation, and that all of this was a creation of the African mind. There was another book among the many books, Papyrus of Annie, Papyrus of Kunafa. But the Papyrus of Kunafa, one man, but the Papyrus of Kananu, a man was going to the market, and some man wanted to play a trick on him, see if he could take something from him. So he put his clothes all across the road, so if he walk on my clothes, I'm going to accuse him of that. If he comes through my field, I'm going to accuse him of that. And so he went through the field, knocked down a stalk of the man's corn, so the man took him to court. And he went pleading his case. He pleaded his case so well. They told the king, his man up there pleading his case so well. And the king said, keep him talking, keep him talking. So someone went and wrote it down, and his plea became law. His plea is what he had a right to, and why he should be protected, became part of the law of the land. This is what Sheikh Anta was trying to explain when he said the origin of civil law began with the African taboos. Once you decide what not to do, you can arrive at what to do. Once you decide what you should do, you can get a handle on what you should not do. Taboo means what you should not do. That's the first thing the African arrived at, what he should not do. And by a process of elimination, he could find out what he should do. This was the beginning of civil law. Not the laws of Hammurabi that came 2000 BC. The Africans were working this out 3,000, 4,000 BC. 3,000 years before the laws of Hammurabi. Yet when Hammurabi's law came on, he was from Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East. People said, this is the beginning of civil law. He wrote out his codes, and he said it was all right to have a slave, but you got to give him Saturday off. What kind of humane law is that? You can beat the slave all right, but you can only beat him with a stick a certain size. Islam would come along, another bring up humane law. You could beat your wife. A lot of people don't even read the Quran. It's right in the Quran. I defy you to read it. You can beat your wife, but you can beat her only with a certain size stick. And if she misbehaves, you can deny her food until she repents. What kind of humanity is this? What kind of religion is this? To go back to these laws created by the Africans before the formation of any religion. Very humane laws. We see the African mind now working at its very best. When Africans had developed dynastic laws, laws that govern the spirituality of the human being. No fights between religions and religions because there were no religions. When I say there was no religions, I don't mean a single human being was without God. We had a universal spirituality. Man and a woman did not even have to worship the same God. They didn't use the word God anyway. Your wife did not have to worship the same force that you have to worship, or in the same way. They recognized there was a universal force in the universe, making the sun, bringing back the spring. They recognized something which we do well to recognize again. God, whoever he is or she is, and they had no problem with she, as we have it now, is a part of everything. Everything that lives is a part of the force of the universe. And whoever the spiritual force of the universe is, he or she is a part of all living things. They did not build churches. They built symbols of the spirituality. Because if you wanted to pray, you didn't necessarily have to go to church, because spirituality was a 24-hour thing every day in the week. If you want to pray to your God, you could pray to the wind, because God was in the wind. Pray to the river, because God was in the water. Most important thing, pray to yourself, because God was a part of you. This was man's highest hour. This was man's most spiritual hour on the earth. This was a period when man enjoyed 1,000 years and no war. And when they finally had wars, they had councils to settle the wars before there was much casualty or much disaster. What I'm trying to tell you is that the African mind had thought out things that we muddle about today, and things that we fight about today, and things that we go to war about. He had already reasoned these things out. And these conflicts did not start among him again until he was associating with foreigners. He had produced a society where he made a principled decision that the lineage would come down through the female side of the family. It makes sense. Who better knows who's the father of the child? She would determine that. In this society, the king's son could never be king, but the king's sister's son could be king. Women did not come to power just because they were women. They came to power because it was their turn. She had to wait her turn just like a man. But once it came her turn, nobody could stop her from taking her turn. She could yield if she didn't want to be king or pharaoh, but no one could deny her chance. And when the African brought into being the first of a number of female gods, he did not feel demeaned. He did not feel less of a man. All of these female gods were respected by both men and women. All of the African women who headed states, who headed armies, were supported 100% by men, and the men did not feel bad about it or start any female war. He wasn't insecure as the European would later be. Now, I've used this reference before, but it bears some repetition. 10,000 years ago in Europe, in the Ice Age, the European had 3 or 4 months to plant, harvest, and store. So therefore, every man, every hand had to work during that short period. A wife was a beast of burden. A wife was a mouth to feed. So therefore, she had to work just as hard as anyone else Everybody's protecting the romantic marriage and the romantic relationship. The same man who began his existence on this earth without a romantic relationship invented the romantic relationship. I love you, marriage. People didn't come together in Africa, I love you. They came together, I respect you. And the old ladies and old men and uncles and members of the family, after you get a certain age, and sometime before you get a certain age, they've got someone picked out for you. Oh, you can knock it if you want to, but you did get one. I bet you'd appreciate somebody picking out one for you now. Sure better than not having one at all. They worked out a system where no girl at a certain age was without one. You got support. When you married a support system. You married out of a support system. No wife beaters, no wife deserters, no teenage pregnancy. You had to behave in a manner to bring honor to your group. You ain't gonna think about now if hitting her. Because if you think about it too seriously, she got 50 uncles, 75 cousins. You got the same thing. All of them gonna get on. All she has to do is step away. They'll do you. They'll teach you the lesson. So we brought no wife beater, no teenage pregnancies. And we brought no people like that from Africa. These people developed away from Africa. My main point is that in this age, 10,000 years ago, because the European mind functioned different from the African mind, if the European woman if the African man got angry with the European woman, told her to get out, she had to cop a plea. She had to beg for mercy. She got out in the cold. She froze to death. And the people on the other side of the hill are not going to take care of it because that's one more mouth to feed. She didn't harvest that crop. In Africa, the woman was the druggist. Anytime a man was sick, she went into the forest and got something to stew up and bark to heal him. Even made his clothes, domesticated agriculture, stopped him from going on the hunt so much because he got enough, some basic food right around the house. Don't tell her that story, you're going to hunt out a deer. We got plenty of food right here. Stay home sometime. I'm the deer. Hunt me. So the woman got very early. She had a leeway. She was the food gatherer. She was the food preserver. She was the person that knew what leaves, what branches, what oils would cure him if he got ill. You think he'd come home and play the fool and tell her to get out? Get out where? Who's going to take care of it? Now you can see why he'll make her a god and why there didn't become no gods in Europe. His mind was very logical. Yeah, she just had just much right to be a god as a man. And he made her so. You study the book When God Was a Woman. Mm-hmm. You study Sheikh Abdul the culture unity of Black Africa. Study his chapter on the female gods of Africa, and the attitude toward females, period. This was the African mind functioning in humanity. The European always feared the woman in power. When she began to exercise power in the church and exercise power in the community, he began to have her burned as a witch. Too much power. This is documented in a book called The Mothers. It's documented in a whole lot of other books also. What I'm trying to say is that there is no comparison in how the mind functioned in Europe and how the mind functioned in Africa. I have said before, when you live in a climate where you have to compete with your brother for your breakfast, your wife, and your land, you develop a certain kind of temperament. But when you live in a climate where you can fish your breakfast out of a brook or pick it out of a bush, you develop a different kind of temperament. And that it is dangerous for these two diametrically opposed temperaments to meet and think they can create harmony. Sun and ice can create no harmony. And sand and ice, sand and sun creates no harmony. Now what is happening in Western Asia is that ice and sand is in conflict. And there's no harmony there. Maybe the greatest achievement of the African mind, in addition to the literature out of which would come the world's religion, was his building, his structure of literature, his creating of great institutions of thought that would later become the basis for the world's first concept of a university. This would be set in motion by Akhenaten, by Imhotep, the world's first physician, architect, multi-genius, doctor, first to operate an abdominal surgeon, first to bring intellects around him and began to discuss the mystery of life, the mystery of fallen things, the mystery of water, the mystery of air. He would later set in motion the school of the crafts, to be referred to in later years as the mystery school. It really wasn't so much as a mystery school, but men who learned certain trades and learned these trades so well, they would pass on the secrets of the trades to their relatives, very close friends, sons, and the like. This was the forerunner of the craft unions, forerunner of the father-son connection in trade unions, only they called them guilds. Out of this would come gatherings of intellects. These gatherings of intellects would later find a great lodge at Luxor. The Arabs called it Luxor. The Greeks called it Thebes. The Africans called it Warat. But this great lodge, the first semblance of a university, men had to go there at the age of 7 and study 40 years before it's decided whether they could continue to be a senior oracle, a senior teacher. If they continued until they were 70. They were let loose on the public. He served the public the rest of his life free of charge. No exchange of money. Because he served the public served him. Now, here in this lodge, you find the first example of the requirement of circumcision 2,000 years before the Hebrew entry. Now you see what was copied from. The foreigners who came into Africa admired Nile Valley civilization and began to copy it, change it around, and call it their own. The African mind is now influencing the outer world. The first foreigners to come into Africa that we have a record of would be the Hebrews. Hebrews, later Hebrews, now referred to as Jews. Let's be clear about one thing. There is no connection, in fact, between the people I'm talking about now and the people who would later be belatedly converted to this faith in Europe, who are white. The people in Europe who were later converted to this faith came from a place called Kassar. All this is outlined in a little paperback book. You still can find it, although it's been taken off the shelf. The 13th tribe.
Oh, Alkebu-lanic.
By Arthur Coates. We explain the nature of that conversion. What did they learn from the Africans, and how did they benefit from the previous working of the African mind when they arrived in Africa? They came from a place called in Western Asia. They came looking for food, for employment. The Africans in their kindness gave them all of these things, including women. They took advantage of this situation. If we are to believe their records, when the country was invaded by some of their distant relatives from Western Asia, the Hittites, called the Shepherd Kings, they joined the Shepherd Kings against the Africans. And once more, we're to believe their records. During this period, they produced the world's first wheeler-dealer politician, Joseph called the Provider. Also during this period, they rose to high positions with the foreign kings. There are certain things you turn to the Bible to sustain. There are certain things you turn to pure history. When you turn to pure history, you do get a record of some people from Western Asia coming into Africa, being treated with hospitality by the Africans, who would later join foreigners against the Africans. finally, they learned in Africa. Now, the one story they tell even today that is not sustained by anything other than folklore that black people haven't found time to question is the story of their enslavement in Egypt. There is not one iota of proof anywhere in existence, not a single document that proves their enslavement in Egypt. If they were enslaved in Egypt, their own folklore or literature repudiates the slavery. How could they leave Egypt worshiping a golden calf with their civilization intact, their religion intact, taking that cow, that gold, the ornamentation? Where would a slave get enough gold to make a golden calf? Must have been well-treated slaves. Then allegedly led by an African named Moses. Now we need to examine the literature of that day. When we examine Egyptian literature, we find no evidence of this folklore. Some folklore is partly sustained by history. Some is pure imagination. And how could they escape from the Egyptian army by crossing a river when the Egyptian army controlled both sides of the river? They would escape from the army on one side only to fall into the arms of the army on the other side. You read a little book called When Egypt Ruled the East, you will understand before the building of the Suez Canal, all of what you now call the Middle East or Western Asia was an extension of Africa in the first place. But the important thing is that they came into Africa with no clear language, no clear religion, no clear culture. When they went out of Africa, they had all three. Whoever they were when they came into Africa, culturally, religiously, and linguistically, when they left, they were an African people. They had an African tradition copied from Africa. And they would be reborn using an African way of life. They entered history through this sojourn in Africa. Who heard of them before? What did they do in Babylonia before? Who knew them before? I say the entry of the Jewish people in world history was through that sojourn in Africa. I said that culture was born in Africa. Culture that they borrowed from a creation of the African mind. A religion they never had before, developed from what they learned from an African mind. Too many people have announced that the Hebrews created monotheism. And some people said that Akhenaten created monotheism. They were wrong in both ways. The Hebrews heard of it and announced it. Akhenaten didn't create it either. Akhenaten restored it because it was there all along. The concept of the oneness of God was part of African spirituality from the very beginning. And because the Africans never tire out God by giving him too much work to do, he gives him a lot of helpers. The Catholic gives God a lot of helpers and calls them saints, and you accept that. When African created God gives them helpers, you just use that primitive. The very concept created by Africa went into the making of the Catholic Church. This too is a part of the product of the African mind. He would lay the basis of it. He would lay the basis of all the three world religions, every element that went into the three major world religions. To read Dr. Ben's work on the subject, African origins of three major Western religions, read John Jackson's book, Christianity Before Christ. Read John Jackson while he's still with us. He's in Chicago, kind of cynical. Every time you see him, he says, oh, this is the last time. I may not be here tomorrow, you know. Somebody has to tell me, John, will you please stop boring me with dying every minute out here? But he's had a rough time of it. John is North Carolina Light Brigade, and could have passed for white if he wanted to, and every time he wants an apartment in New York, he just go past for white and gets it, you know. He devoted his whole life to black causes, and has written what he said is his last book, his magnum opus, Age of Gold and Silver. Will the World to Me, and a girl called Ava. Carry on in my name. I'm finished. 83 years old, that ain't nothing. Du Bois is 95 and had laid out a plan with that. It would take him 50 years if he finished it at 95. Chancellor Williams is about 92 right now. He's in a nursing home in Washington. Now what I'm trying to say to you is that we have inherited a spirituality created by the African mind. We have inherited the basis of a technology created by the African mind. We have inherited philosophical thought created by the African mind, documented in CLR, in George M. James' Stolen Legacy. More documented now in the new book by Obenga, The Pharaonic Origins of African, of Greek civilization and Greek culture. And still again in Sheikh Anta Diop's new and still unpublished work, Civilization of Barbarism. There's a lot of people who've done that work well. You haven't read them well. White man named Martin Bonnell, comes along with a book called Black Athena. Whole lot of people been living a long time, haven't read one single book by a black writer on the subject who writes considerably better. He takes most of his references from black writers. All the black writers who haven't read any black books are now reading Martin Bonnell, quoting him. And he got most of his stuff from Dr. Ben. Hung out in his class. Some of you need the sanction of white. And I don't know what it is, but our minds, our craving for imported things or things from outside. I've already told you the story of Jamaicans who like good pies and fruit cakes. The war came and they couldn't get the ingredients imported. Some enterprise in Jamaica took some local fruits, stamped the word imported. They bought it. When the war was over and they could get ingredients from England, he finally told them he was eating Jamaican fruits all along. How could you keep on doing it? They stopped buying it, the man comes and went out of business. Doesn't matter if somebody else's ice being colder. We have to gain more confidence in ourselves, and we have to read more than just philosophical literature. We have to read the great political literature written by the African mind. The work of Nnamdi Ezekwe of Nigeria, African Renaissance, his book on Liberia, his autobiography, African Odyssey. Read the great writers from Nigeria, from Ghana, Casely Hayford, The Truth About the West African Land Question, his nationalistic novel, Ethiopia Unbound. Another work by Dankwa, a great spiritual political leader of Ghana, The Canned Doctrine of God, Chema Bukwa Handbook. Another great work written before independence toward nationhood in West Africa. Nigeria and Ghana, but especially Ghana, has produced more independent political literature than any other nation in Africa. John Mansa Sabar's Bantic Customary Law, an excellent book on how to use African culture to create a new African state. Africans have not been slackers, giving us ideas for our uplift, ideas that we can use for our children. We have not read this literature. We have not read the literature of great men from South Africa. John Tingo, Jebebu Platje's excellent work on the native problem in Southern Africa. Thomas Mafolo's work on history of the so-called Bantu people. Kamini's new work on Emperor Chaka, the Zulu. Chanya Chebi's work, Things Fall Apart, been read so much it's about to fall apart. He's written 5 or 6 books since then, all good, and all need to be read with some respect. James Nguzi's work, in which he's calling for Africans to write in their own language. If someone wants to translate them into another language, all right, but write first to your own people. And if you want to become universal, you become universal first among your own people. I'm saying that if we got a message, that message must first get across to our own people. And if the rest of the world wants that message, all the good. But that message must first go to our own people. That message must first serve our own people. I have confidence in the African's mind. Yes, sir. I have confidence in the African peoples and their ability to lay out a program that will not only save African people, but that will save all people. And for our salvation, we must consistently turn toward ourselves, our writers, and our literature. We must turn toward some of the new women writers, although I find some a little hard to take. Especially this woman, Sharon Ali, in her silly book. I find that Reverend Cleave's daughter has written a short book called Mad at Miles, because she heard that Miles, what's his last name? Miles Davis didn't treat Cicely Tyson right. And from that, she took off and did a very good dissertation on women in general. I thought that was more intelligently written and some kind of depth that you could get a handle on, and it's usable. There's a debate going on about man sharing, whether we should consider it or not. My answer is you can do it with intelligence and respect and dignity. Think about it, but if you can't do it, it's going to be just unofficial pimping, forget about it. But there's a crisis in our society. There is a crisis in the relationship between man and woman and family. I think it's the most critical crisis among us right now, because it's the basis of nationhood, bringing the family together. The family unit must function in relationship to the new nation and a new people moving forward. I don't think any of us read enough. I think there's some sincere people, both men and women, among us, doing some good work. I have great admiration for the work of the transplanted Barbadian writer, Paula Marshall, born here in Brooklyn, of Bayesian parents, who writes with such beauty and such knowledge of the politics of what she's saying. Some of the things of Maya Angelou are more entertainment than informative, though she's still a friend. I think there's beginning to emerge a new kind of historian and new kind of thought, social thought, and finally that I'm not in the classroom every day. I began to do more political work in my own writing, having finished my first big political book, and I started on my second one, Condition Reflex, the Dilemma of the Africans Away from Home. I think good work is still going to be done. I think a lot of things out here is a fake, but I know that you have enough smarts to separate one thing from the other. The general scene is hopeful in spite of all the phoniness you have to wade through. I think the African mind, both man and woman, has the capacity to bring African salvation into being. I don't know when it will be the time for me to go, and I'm going to delay it as long as possible. And I'll even ask God for a little more time to stay on the earth, because there are so many things to do. But when I leave, whenever it is, I'm going to leave with the confidence that my people have the capacity, the mental capacity, to deliver themselves and create a new freedom that will ensure the freedom for their children and other children still unborn. There's so many ways a man can say to a people that my life has been a great love affair. And that love affair has been with you. Sometimes it has been rough. I don't know whether I would want to have it any other way. Thank you. Has been with you. Sometimes it has been rough. I don't know whether I would want to have it any other way. Thank you.